Hey, everybody, and welcome to our April episode of Voices of WIA. First of all, how did it get to be April quite so quickly? So anyway, this episode, like all of our Voices of WIA episodes, is brought to you by Women in Apologetics, which exists to educate, equip, and encourage women to defend their faith in Christ with confidence and grace. And we are so glad that you are here with us tonight. So let us know that you're watching by saying hello in the chat. And also, why did you pick this episode? What was it that drew you to this episode? Let us know in the chat. We'd like to know that too. And also, be ready to ask a question tonight of our wonderful, insightful guest, Sarah Stonestreet, so that you can be entered in our giveaway this evening. If you and I haven't met yet, my name is Lori, and I am your happy host here at Voices of WIA, but especially when we have guests like tonight's guest. Tonight, we'll be giving away a copy of Live Not by Lies later on in the show. So to be eligible, all you have to do is post a question in the chat for our guest before the Q&A time and be present in the chat during the giveaway. And I'm going to let you know when we get closer to that time. So don't worry about that. You won't miss it. So just post a question and be present in the chat at the time of the giveaway. So our guest this evening will also be a keynote speaker at our 2024 WIA conference in Nashville, Tennessee. And I know you're not going to want to miss that. She is a wonderful speaker. She has wonderful things to say. We have a great topic lined up for her this fall. It's called Ancient Hope for a Modern World. And the conference is going to be held on Friday and Saturday, September 13th and 14th. And if you would like more information, or when you get ready to register, you just check out our conference webpage at womeninapologetics.com/2024 WIA Conf, C-O-N-F, womeninapologetics.com 2024 WIA Conf. So I am so excited for you to meet Sarah. Her name is Sarah Stonestreet, and she is the host of the Strong Women podcast, where she shares stories of women who are walking faithfully with Christ in their various seasons of life, with the gifts that they have been given in the spheres of influence in which they have been placed. Her main job in this season of life is to love and serve her husband, John, and their 4 children. So I'd love for you to extend a warm welcome this evening to Sarah. Welcome, Sarah. Thank you so much for being our guest tonight. And I can't wait to have this conversation with you. I had so much fun talking with you about this when we prepped for this interview. I think that we have some really interesting, deep things to talk about that maybe most women don't get exposed to, and they're just regular Sunday school classes and Bible study classes, or groups. So I'm just glad that you're here, and I'm excited to hear everything that you have to say this evening.
Well, thank you. I'm so glad to be here. And thank you, listeners who have joined us live tonight. I so appreciate you taking the time to join us.
Me too. Me too. You guys are going to be blessed by Sarah. She has so much insight. And like I said, the topic, I think, being a post-Christian Christian woman in a post-Christian world, that's not your average topic, in most places, in most churches. And I think there's really a lot to be learned within this whole topic. How did you get kind of started on this topic? I don't think I ever asked you that.
Oh, yeah. Well, I guess that's the moment we find ourselves in. And I have 3 teenage daughters. And so I care a lot about this topic. I care a lot about this cultural moment because this is where we're called to. And I care a lot about what it looks like to be made in the image of God as a woman, because I want to understand it, because that's my design. And I want to be able to invite my girls into the beauty of what that means and how God is calling them and wants to use them to build his kingdom in this moment. So I don't know. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does actually, and I love that you mentioned that. We're going to be talking about it later, but you mentioned just in the script and in our conversation, the course of our conversation, that part of our calling has to do with our moment, and that is really so insightful. It seems like that might be obvious, but I don't think it is. I think somehow
Yeah.
we have this idea of calling as being something else, and we skip over that part, that the time in which we live, which God has ordained for us to live, is actually part of our calling. And I think that's really interesting and really exciting to talk about. So, okay, so let's start by defining our terms. If we're going to be Christian women in a post-Christian world,
Yes.
I imagine that most of our viewers and listeners have heard those terms, but they may only be vaguely familiar. So I think we would be doing them a really big service
Mm-hmm.
a moment to define some of our terms so that everybody's on the same page about how we understand these words, not only for tonight's discussion, but just in general. So let's start with postmodern. What can you tell us about postmodernism, how it relates to the world we live in, and how
Yes.
we should think of it as Christian women today?
Yeah. Well, I want to say that I'm not going to be able to explain postmodernism in super depth, but I want to recommend a book to everybody. If you haven't read Strange New World by Carl Truman, he goes through kind of the thought journey, the train that has gotten us from point A to point B in this thought journey of why postmodernism. And really, I guess to sum up what I mean by postmodernism is this swap where we used to know, like, how do we know things? There's three different ways how to know things. That's through revelation, through reason, and through experience. And in the pre-modern thought, it was way heavily weighted on revelation, especially shaped by the church. And then when modernism came along, which involves the Enlightenment, the emphasis was put on reason. Like, we can reason. If we can't reason it, then it doesn't make sense, and we're going to push it away. And you could see us trying to untether ourselves from God, from a supernatural thing that we couldn't reason out. And then postmodernism comes along and is jaded by reason. I mean, look at the horrific things that happened under reason. We have Hitler, we have Mao Zedong in China, we have all these atrocities that happen, and postmodernism starts to get jaded by that. So that thought process becomes more experience, is how we know, and that's more individualistic. And so to even take that further, so it's that this is where terms like, I'm glad you found your truth, that's not true for me, but I'm glad you found your truth, that's kind of an attitude or a posture towards um how we know. And so you need to read Carl's book, because he goes really into depth about it, and you kind of go, whoa, that makes so much sense how we got to where we are. But now, um another thing, let me highlight another thing that postmodernism would say: there's no big truth, there's no one big story that makes sense of everything. It's more focused on how you experience life. So that makes a huge difference. And for a time, Christians were just seen as like inconvenient, but now in our culture right now, it's really shifted to the Christians are not just annoying, that Christians are actually bigoted and dangerous, because we're saying there is a truth, there is a way to flourishing. And of course, when you say that's true for you, this is true for me, well, our truths are going to clash at some point. And that's kind of what we see happening right now. But I do want to describe post Christian, what I mean by that. Do you
Mhm.
want me to go on to that, or did you have
Sure.
something
No, no,
you
no.
want
Sure, go ahead.
to? Okay. Because I wanted to just start off by saying, when we say post-Christian, we're not we're not assuming that there was any time in history that was actually fully Christian. But there were assumptions that governed how we did life together and how we did society together. And a lot of those underlying assumptions were Judeo-Christian, just kind of what's right and wrong. What are humans for? What leads to flourishing? The way we answered those questions really fit with a Christian worldview. So that's what
Mhm.
I mean by a Christian way of seeing society. And a post-Christian way would be like we're trying to, again, to untether ourselves from
Mhm.
anything that we owe allegiance to, or we have to think outside of ourselves about. But
Mhm.
friends, here's the good news is that's an attitude, that's a term that helps us kind of categorize where we are, but there is no post-Christian because Christ has died, Christ has risen, he was there in the beginning. He's reigning now. He's invited us to rule and rest and reign with him. And that is the world that we live in, no matter what we see in this small vision that we have in our moment. The reality is we live in his world and he is in control. So there's no real post-Christian world.
Right. I totally agree. And I think it's very interesting that you pointed out that we were heavy on, when I say we, obviously, we're talking about kind of human history, our collective
Right. Our
shared
thought.
human history. Right. Our thought history was heavy on revelation. And then it moved, sort of outgrew that, so to speak, and then went to reason. If we can't see it, taste it, touch it, connect the dots, observe it, that sort of thing, verify it, then it's not real. And then we sort of moved through that, and now we are here in the postmodern and post-Christian. I remember 10 years ago, I think I went to a prayer meeting, and I hadn't studied apologetics yet. And the pastor said that we were slowly moving out of that time period in our country, and probably larger than that as well, but definitely in our country, where Christianity, just like you said, was no longer seen as irrelevant or
Mhm.
old-fashioned, which we definitely went through that. But now it's being seen as being immoral and dangerous. And I remember thinking, what?
Right.
How is that even possible? How is that possible that we could be seen as immoral or dangerous? This is the sweetest, most beautiful, most wonderful message in the entire world. How can people see it this way? And then when I started studying apologetics and realized that
Mhm.
there's such a history of thought that precedes us, that is what has given way to post-Christian. So really, like you said, it's just the posture
Mhm.
of society toward to religion. They've sort of outgrown the Judeo-Christian worldview, so to speak. I'm assuming that's
Yes.
what you mean.
Yes, I think that's really well said. And another thing Carl Truman talks about is that like the highest virtue in our moment is what he calls expressive individualism.
Yes.
And that
Mhm.
is he defines it this way: the notion that I am most truly myself when I'm able to express outwardly what that voice of nature says to me inwardly, which
Right.
once you read his book, you'll discover that's not a new idea. That really has its roots back with Rousseau. But that is going to come up against Christianity, and that Christianity is going to be seen as a threat because
Mhm.
we're proposing that there is a way to flourishing, and it's not just following your desires and giving and going towards pleasure. We're saying there's a better way, but it doesn't always look like a better way
Yeah,
to
sure.
the secular mind.
Sure. And Jesus told us that to find your life, you have to lose it. And that does feel so heavy and burdensome until you get on the other side of it, until you understand that you're dealing with God, who is everything that's good. And so
Yeah.
when you're submitting yourself to that, then the outcome is obviously good. I don't want to unpack this too much because we have so many more terms, and I think they're so interesting.
Yes. Okay.
But yes, I'm totally on board with that. I think that a lot of people are kind of confused as to where this term came from. How come all of a sudden everything is your truth, my truth, and we can't just have a shared truth? And the short answer is that the postmodern worldview has sort of moved in and taken up root and sort of camped out in the
Mhm.
era in which we live, and we have to deal with that reality one way or the other. Which brings us to our next term, which is worldview. I think that's another term that we kind of bounce around a lot in church circles. And for most people, they kind of know what it means, but maybe not specifically. So can you help us out with that one as well?
Yeah, definitely. So worldview is simply our view of and for the world, how we make sense of things. It's think of it kind of like a pair of glasses. My husband uses this illustration often, and I think it's really helpful. If we put on glasses that are blue tinted, we're going to look out and the world is going to look blue. Or if we switch it out and put on red glasses, same thing. We're going to see it from that vantage point. And so our worldview is a set of beliefs that we put on knowingly or unknowingly. Everyone has a pair of glasses, a worldview that they put on and make sense of the world around them and make sense of their place in it. So these are how like to kind of get to the heart of what is my worldview. How do I see the world? That we would answer how we answer the ultimate questions like, why are we here? What are humans for? What's our purpose? Is there a higher being? Where are we going when we die? These are ultimate questions that all of us have to answer, whether we do it consciously or not. So that's kind of the simple version of that's a worldview, and everyone has one.
You said that. I'm glad you said that, because I think a lot of people don't recognize that you don't necessarily know what your worldview is. Some of our worldview assumptions we sort of pick up and put together like a patchwork quilt,
Mhm.
just from different places, different experiences, different people we bump into, different people that we give authority to. And so, but we all have one. And that's one of the
Mhm.
reasons that WIA loves this topic, is because it's the kind of thing that we need to ask ourselves these questions and assess our worldview so we can compare it to the biblical worldview to see how close or far we might be. So I think that's a really important point. I'm glad you mentioned that. With that in mind, tell us a little bit about your being a woman, a Christian woman in a postmodern culture. What does it mean to be a strong woman? I loved this definition that you had. So share that with our audience. What is a strong woman definition?
Yeah. Okay. So let me tell you a little backstory about how I came up with this definition, because it kind of bothers me when people try to like parse down this is what femininity is, and it's like this nice, neat little tidy definition. And so I was thinking, well, does that I feel like we often go to that nice little tidy definition rather than going to design and stepping way back and saying, well, what are humans for? And what does it mean that we're made male and female? And why is that important? So I love to talk about that topic, but that's not really your question. So I'm going to go deeper into this and say, I was looking around me thinking about the Christian women in my life that I thought really displayed strength. And so the definition that I've kind of come up with is that a strong woman develops eyes to see the world around her with all its beauty and brokenness, and to love with Christ's love with the gifts she's been given in the spheres of influence in which she's been placed. So this can encompass all different kinds of vocations and seasons of
Yeah,
life and giftings. Yeah.
I love that. Developing eyes to see the world and its beauty and its brokenness.
Yes.
Yeah, I think that's so important, because we most of us tend to see the brokenness,
Yeah.
and there is beauty too. And if we can see the brokenness, then we know what to repair, what we
Mhm.
need to, where it is that we might have a heart for displaying God's goodness and His wisdom in repairing the brokenness. So I think that's a great definition. I love that definition. Okay, so eyes to see the beauty and brokenness, and
Mhm.
love. What was
Love
remind me
with Christ's love
with Christ's love? Okay,
in
awesome.
the
In the
yeah,
Go
with
ahead.
the gifts we've been given in the spheres of influence in which we've been placed.
Yeah, I love that. That is so
Mhm.
all-encompassing. That's really lovely. I do love that. So we live in this very, very uncomfortable, at least I think it's uncomfortable, postmodern world. What is the relationship exactly between the postmodern world in which we live
Mhm.
and our individual callings
Right.
necessarily?
Yeah, well, I love this question because it really gets me jived up, because it's not an accident that we're in this
Right.
time and place. It's not like, well, I guess we gotta do the best we can with what we got. It's not this fatalistic thing. Like, think about Acts 17 when Paul goes to talk to the Athenians, and he is, you're probably familiar with this, but just in case you're not, he's looking around at all their monuments to all these gods, and they have a unknown God And he said, "Hey, I have something to tell you about this God that you know is out there, but you're not sure about him." Anyway, throughout that conversation, Paul says, and he made from what he's describing about this God, and he made from one man every nation of mankind to live on all the face of the earth, having, listen carefully to this part, having determined allotted periods and the boundaries of their dwelling place, that they should seek God and perhaps feel their way toward him and find him. Yet he's actually not far from each one of us. For in him we live and move and have our being, as some of your own poets have said, for we are indeed his offspring. But it's not an accident that we find ourselves in this time and in this place. And for you parents out there, it's not an accident that your kids are in this time and in this place. And my husband always jokes that that's the one of the truths that he doesn't really like in scripture is that our kids are like, it's not an accident that this is their calling too, because as he would say, I wish there was like, I wish they were part of the good old days. I don't know when they were, but they sound great, you know. But that we are called to this moment, and
Mhm.
it's not only not an accident, but it is our calling, which brings with it a lot of things to unpack. What does it mean that we're called to this moment?
Yeah, I definitely want to get into that. But I think that by itself is such a wonderful, freeing thing, because I know a lot of
Yeah.
people feel burdened that we are living in the time that we are living in. And a lot of us are talking about, I don't, how hard it was for us to raise kids, and then our kids are gonna have to
Yeah.
raise kids in the future, and with this as their legacy. And so I think it's very freeing and very helpful to know that God has sort of preordained things to be such as they are. And therefore we, like Peter says, we've been given everything that we need for
Yeah.
in our divine purpose to live a godly life and fulfill our callings. And so I think that's very reassuring that God knows, and God has placed within us and our kids certain gifts to serve this generation well. And so we don't have to
Yeah.
live quite so fearfully as I think it's very tempting to do.
Yeah.
And
Can I
I
add
do.
to what you're saying
Yeah.
there? Because not only that, but in Second Corinthians, 2 Corinthians 5, um, this is right around that time where they're talking about, therefore, if anyone is in Christ, he's a new creation. The old has passed away. Behold, the new has come. All this is from God, who through Christ reconciled us to himself and gave us the ministry of reconciliation. So the
Mm,
beautiful thing about this is that when we are reconciled with Christ, it's not just me and God. We have this personal relationship. We're swept up into this grand narrative, this grand
mhm,
thing that God is doing. And we don't sit on the side and go, "Yay, Jesus, you're so great." He's like, "No, you are playing in this game." And
mhm.
and he has, in his great mystery, decided not to just do things on his own. He includes us in it, which is this huge job of bringing all things under the lordship of Christ. Bringing, as we pray in the Lord's Prayer, your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Like, that involves his church, which is us, you guys. Like, that's us. And so that excites me because that's our calling.
Yes. And it is a sweeping grand narrative, and it's beautiful. And I think, I suspect sometimes I wonder if that's why it has landed where it has landed. That's the way the enemy is going to attempt to subvert
Mhm.
God's kingdom in this day and in this age, is by simply taking the idea of a grand narrative off the table with as many people
Right.
as it takes, so that we become ineffective, so that it becomes sort of immune to that concept. And so
Hmm.
even though that's a difficult charge, it's also very exciting. We live in times where we are able to make a really big difference in a moment in history where it really counts for a
Yeah.
lot because of what we're facing.
Right.
So I love that. And I want to connect that with the 4 questions that the Colson Center trains its fellows to ask while they're exploring their callings from God. But we're going to stop just a minute and remind everyone about our book giveaway. So I love this book. I read it when it came out. I thought it was really interesting, really compelling, I guess is probably even a better word. So tell us why you felt like this was a really good companion to our topic this evening.
Yes. Well, one of the reasons is because one of the stories that I'm hoping I get to share later comes out of this book. But I'm not going to give anything away. No spoiler alerts there. But I mean, I think that this we're not let me say it this way. This is not the first time in history that the church has been challenged to lie
Mhm.
or to push the
Mhm.
truth away, to water it down. Like, this is not the first time. And in this book, the Live Not by Lies, Rod Dreher tracks stories of people who lived under communism and how they stayed faithful. But the title actually comes from Alexander Solzhenitsyn. When he was about to be exiled to the West, he had exposed Soviet totalitarianism, and they were not happy with him, and so they were about to exile him. And he wrote an essay titled Live Not by Lies. And he basically said, listen, everybody's saying that totalitarianism is too powerful. It can't be overthrown. Well, guess what? It can be overthrown. And the way it's overthrown is just don't give in to their lies. The lies are what's holding people down and in fear of standing up for truth. And so Solzhenitsyn says, you may not have the strength to go stand on the corner and proclaim the truth, but you do have the what is it? The fortitude to just not comply with the lies. Like, just don't say what's not true. And I
Mhm.
think, gosh, in our moment right now, aren't we so tempted to lie about small things? Like, I'm just thinking, especially with the all the gender ideology going around,
Yeah.
that is built on lies about design and lies about our neighbors, lies about ourselves. And
Mhm.
so we have to be really thoughtful about, well, what does it mean to live in truth and not in lies? And that takes a lot of discernment right now, because even just some of the wording and the language that we've adopted in the church, if we really start to tear it down, we're like, wait a second, that's actually lying about what, take the word transgender. That's not actually a thing.
Right.
It is
Right.
male and female. So even
Yeah.
some of this language, not that we're all using that um, and we're complying with the lies, but what I'm saying is I would just encourage you to really take some thought. How can my language be as truthful as possible?
Right. When the untruth is just so, I mean, it's just taken as a given.
Right.
It's popular
Hmm.
and it's widespread and it's just assumed in many cases. And so I think sometimes it's really easy to start adopting those. I think you're right about that without really realizing it. And so that's a really good reality check. So
Hmm.
um, I would encourage any of you who even might be remotely interested in this book, just remember all you have to do to be eligible for the book giveaway is to post a question for Sarah. And it doesn't have to be about this book. It can be about anything we talk about this evening. Post a question in the chat and then be present in the chat during the giveaway, which will happen at the end of the episode. So anyway, okay, moving on back to where we were. What are the 4 questions? I love these questions. I did the Colson program not too long ago, and I thought these questions were very, very insightful. Can you help us understand, walk through these 4 questions for us as to what they are, what these questions are, and how they help us sort out or contemplate our callings from God?
Yes. Okay. So I'll say these twice, so don't worry, and maybe we can type them in the chat box. But what is good that can be promoted? What's missing that I can add? What's broken that I can work to mend? And what's evil that must be stopped? I'll say that one more time. What's good that we can promote? What's missing that can be added? What's broken that can be mended? And what's evil that must be stopped? Lori, do you want me to give examples at this point, or
Please do. I think that
Okay.
would be great. Like, because I think these questions are so good and so insightful that if we can help people kind of connect the dots more concretely, I think that would be a really big service for them.
Okay. Yeah, and listen, you can ask these questions of yourself individually, which I think is really helpful. Then ask it of your family.
Yeah.
What are your giftings, and how can you address these different areas, the good, the broken, the missing, and the evil. And then you can even go further and ask this of your church or your community. And so, but I want to give you an example. I'm so glad I get to give this example. This is from this book, Live Not by Lies. And I just love this family. It's towards the end of the book. Rod tells the story about the Benda family. The mother's name is Camilla, and they lived in Czechoslovakia when it was under communism. So that was in the like 1979-ish time frame. And they had 6 children, and they were a Catholic family in the resistance. So Czechoslovakia was basically divided into, one side was more religious than the other. And the Benda family lived on the not so religious side. And so they were one of the only Christian families in the resistance, and they were one of the top ones. And so their home, their apartment was about a block from the secret police station in Prague. So when people were going to get interrogated, they would often stop at the Benda house and come in for a little spot of tea and some encouragement. Here's how to stand firm. And then on their way back from being interrogated, they would often stop and get some encouragement from Camilla and her husband. Either like, okay, next time it's okay. You did fine. It's all right. Or encouragement that they made it through or whatever. They hosted a lot at their apartment. So there was this community building and hospitality. They involved all 6 of their children in the resistance, which I read that and I was a little bit like, ugh, because they would teach their kids to swallow paper. They would send their kids on errands because kids weren't stopped as often. I don't know. I'm just leaving it out there. I'm not making an opinion about that. But the thing I did like about their posture and their involvement of their kids is that they took their kids seriously. They recognized that this is their time and place. This is their responsibility too, to their neighbors. So I thought that was pretty powerful. But anyway, all of the kids, do you want to hop in and say something?
No, go ahead. Go
Okay.
ahead.
All of the kids had to go to the public communist schools and were basically brainwashed all day long. And Camilla worked as a university professor. But when they all came back together at night, she would read out loud to them 2 or 3 hours every single night. And they went through all kinds of books. But the book that they kept coming back to was Lord of the Rings. And her son was talking to Rod about that. And he said, we knew that Mordor was real, but we needed to know it could be defeated, which sounds very Chesterton-ish.
Yeah.
But we knew it was real. We needed to know it could be defeated, but we also needed to know that once it was defeated, the work's not done. We still have to rebuild for the flourishing of our neighbors. And I just thought it was so beautiful. And so anyway, at one point, her husband was put in prison, and he was offered to be let out. So he was in prison for 4 years. He was offered to be let out if he would immigrate to the West with all his family. And he wrote his wife, Camilla, and she said, we can't do that. These are the people we're called to. And so I'm telling you that story because that's not in our moment. It's a little outside of the box. But think about how that answers those questions. What's good that can be promoted in a society that was very oppressive and totalitarian? Well, what's good that can be promoted? Hospitality, human connection, community building, fighting for what does true flourishing look like? Okay, well, what's missing that can be added? Again, to the hospitality, this respite, a place for people who were suffering. What's broken that can be mended? Well, same kind of stuff. What's evil that must be stopped? That's their resistance work. They were working hard to stop the evil forces of communism, but then they were also this answers one of those questions. They were also looking forward to what does it look like to rebuild.
Mm.
I just love that story. That's one, and I can share more, but I don't want to talk too much, so you tell me.
Well, I think that's great. I think I think you're absolutely right. And I think that really helps us understand that there's probably, I think for most of us in the US, when we think of calling, and you can tell me if you think if you disagree, but I think for most of us, when we think about calling, we think about career. We think
Mhm.
about how do I build a career for myself, which is not a small undertaking. It
Right.
definitely has its place in the bigger picture of our individual lives. Obviously, we have to have a job. Obviously, we have to do that, and so that's important to run through the grid and figure out what the appropriate career might be. But from a biblical worldview, our calling is so much larger than just our job. Our calling
Mhm.
is all this other stuff that we're talking about. How can I use my job, my skills, my free time, my leisure, my family, whatever it might be, to accomplish these four things? I think that's so, so helpful. And to see that not only did they do a good job with that, but that she was so committed to
Mhm.
making sure that they helped those people and were a light to those people. I mean, that takes some fortitude and some
Yeah.
guts. So good for her for developing that. And I think when we um, uh, find some convictions when we answer those questions, that's how you get the guts, is by really answering those questions honestly and kind of
Mhm.
coming up with that place where it's just kind of unique, that place where the world's need and your gifts kind of intersect one another.
Right, right. And the other thing to keep in mind as for our listeners is that this usually means something really small. Like, just think about
Yeah.
Camilla opening Lord of the Rings for the 5th time, you know? She probably wasn't
Mhm.
thinking, "This is gonna change the world," but she was
Right.
doing the faithful thing, the small thing in front of her. I mean, Mother Teresa has this wonderful quote. It's basically like, "Do the next right thing with great love," or something like that, and it often starts small. Like, I think a funny example of this would be, when the world shut down with COVID that first week and it was like, nobody's going anywhere. I don't know how you guys felt, but I was so antsy. And I woke up one morning like, God, who needs me? And I'm like wanting to jump over the sphere of influence that's right in front of me. I didn't realize it yet, but I'm like, how can I help the whole world? How can I help the whole world? And all of a sudden I realize, oh, I've kind of missed the people that are in my face right now. So it literally for that day, me choosing to promote the good was I'm going to bring my husband a cup of coffee and I'm going to put down what I'm doing and I'm going to listen to my kids because they're anxious too. Okay,
Mhm.
so you see what I mean? I'm hoping you're catching this. It's not necessarily build some big thing that's going to rescue children, which it might lead to that, but it always starts in your sphere of influence.
Yeah,
Don't
I
jump
love that.
over the small things.
I
It's
love
a
that.
tendency. Yeah.
I have forgotten, I think it's in Zephaniah, but it could be Zechariah. Do not despise the day of small beginnings. That's such an
Mm.
encouragement. Who would have thought that Camille Benda offering tea and a shoulder was a brave, courageous kind of thing, but
Right.
it really was. So, okay, so once we have asked these questions, we will uncover a great deal about the opportunities that are, like you say, are right in front of us
Mhm.
to participate in God's redemptive purposes. So, is there a way that strikes me as kind of a stewardship issue? Is there a
Mm.
way that we should properly think about stewarding these opportunities that we have been given?
Absolutely. And I think there's not one given, like, here's a guidebook on how to choose to spend your days. These are things you really have to take to the Lord in prayer. And this developing eyes to see that we kind of talked about in that definition, um, it is a huge part of life to just start paying attention. And we're not going to get to the end of our virtue formation by jumping there. It's going to be these small choices, these everyday choices, and this posture of walking before the Lord. There's a prayer in the Book of Common Prayer that's basically like, help us to remember that we live our lives before you. And I find myself praying that throughout the day because it's easy to forget that. But as far as stewarding, remember, I'm saying start small. What do you do well? That's one question to ask. But then if you're thinking about, like, let's say for those of us who have a family and a home, well, that's more resources that we have to kind of play around with. Like, here's an example of something small but good that could be promoted, maybe missing that could be added. Our teenagers are going through this massive amount of mental health issues. One of the main reasons why is they're doing everything virtually and digitally, and they're missing some face to face, looking in people's eyes, seeing and empathizing with others, those kind of things. And does your family have that space to do that? Could you invite teens into your home? We just had a group of teens over the other night, and I was looking at it going, yes. Yes. And I honestly didn't do a whole lot. I made my kids do all the hosting, and but that's okay. I just opened my space. And they most of them had their phones put away. If I'm being really brave, my goal is actually to have a basket where everybody puts their phone in it. And I've done it sometimes. It just feels awkward and I feel like the bad mom. But and when I say it, I'm like, well, that's not the bad mom. You should be doing that. But anyway, there is kind of an understanding at our home that people just put their phones away. And that's because we want to prioritize that face to face. So that would be like, that's a stewarding thing, don't you think?
Yeah, I do think that's a stewarding thing. And I think that it's a skill that we have to learn. I don't think it comes naturally to us.
Mhm.
I think that's something that we have to really understand and look at from a broader perspective, and kind of you have to wait and assess and analyze all these different moving parts, and that steward it like that, because there is a whole lot to think about, and we have to steward those that way with a lot of thought and a lot of intention, a lot of um, Christ-like, compassionate love towards people, and just with a heart to be useful to the kingdom and useful to God, and helpful in
Mhm.
putting God's character on display. So
Yes.
yeah, absolutely. We have a couple of questions so far, if that's okay.
Yeah, let's do it.
Actually, yeah, we'll go back to that question. One of the questions we got was, when do you plan to write a book? Do you have any plans like that in the future?
Oh, yeah, I kinda dream about it, but I haven't had something weigh on my heart enough, you know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah.
I'm not sure I've got anything new to add yet, or I don't know. There's so many good books out there. I don't know. If you have an idea, tell me.
There are some really good ones. Okay, we also have another question we have from our viewers. Scripture says in several places to avoid dissension and foolish controversies and to promote unity, but there's also examples of standing up against wrongdoing.
Yeah.
So how do we know when it's time to fight for truth over unity? Good
Oh,
question.
great question. Great question. My pastor has a saying. It's actually not his, but I just credit him with it because I've only heard him say it, but he got it from somebody. But it's in essentials, unity; in non-essentials, liberty; in all things, charity. And so there is a posture towards disagreement that we can handle as believers, and that we have to, because we sharpen each other. We point out blind spots in each other, and
Mhm.
there is a truth. And it's not just that the truth is out there and we are forced to obey it. It's that the truth is good. It's good for us. It's good for our neighbors. It's good for those who want to reject it. The truth is good because we have a designer, we have a creator who created us with love and care and purpose. So it only makes sense that we would need to live according to that design. And when we try not to, it wreaks havoc on us. And so there are things worth standing up for. And and of course, one thing that I think people get confused about is that, I've heard a lot of Christians say, well, I want to be truthful, but I want to be loving. And I
Mhm.
want to just say, stop right there, because you cannot divorce those two things. They
Right.
go together.
Right.
And we do need to learn how to say things kindly, how to see the person, how to kind of separate the ideas, the ideology that's taking people captive from the actual victim that's being taken captive. So
Sure.
that's kind of my first thoughts to that question.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I think that's such a difficult place to be for most of us, because I think most of us really do want to stand up. I think most of us really do want to speak up, and we're so terrified that we're going to say something the wrong way,
Mhm.
especially right now, because the ability to offend or to be offended is so high. It's so
Yeah.
easy to be offended. It's almost in vogue almost to
Yeah.
be offended. And so it's almost impossible for us to figure out, well, how do I say something that has a truth content to it, because that's going to offend someone. So how do I say that in such a way that it's going to be received as loving? And that is a really difficult, sticky spot. And so I think that we have to consider a lot of different things. But
Yeah.
I know at one point when we were going through some stuff with our church, a couple of people were very vocal about saying that unity at the cost of truth isn't really unity. That's not
Right.
that isn't glorifying to God, because Jesus, of course, is the ultimate truth under which all things ultimately will find its place. And so, if you're going to sacrifice truth for the sake of unity, you haven't really accomplished anything. So I think that we really have to get committed to the idea that first and foremost we are going to seek and promote truth.
Mhm.
And then you just figure out a way to say those things. I think a lot of times too, we get too myopic. Is this right or is this wrong? As a Christian, should I support this? Should I not? And really, if we, like you were saying, we have a designer, there's a whole big plan happening. So if we can back up and get a little perspective and see how that issue
Yeah.
fits in the bigger plan, sometimes we can make statements to those effects, about how the one misstep or the one issue that we're looking at is really interconnected with a lot of other things. And that really helps give us a little bit of wiggle room.
Yeah, and if I could add to that, the other thing is, so one of my favorite authors is Flannery O'Connor, which people probably have mixed opinions about Flannery O'Connor. Her stories are interesting, but what I love her writing about writing. And one time she was asked, "How do you be a good Catholic writer?" And because she was a Catholic, and she said, well, you have to be a Catholic. And so what she was trying to get to there was that you have to be formed. And so for us to be able to respond with calm and clarity and conviction during this moment of confusion. Whoa, I just got like Baptist pastor on us with all my C's. But in order for us to do that, we have to put in the hard work. So we may not be an expert at everything, but since we are called to this moment, we need to be ready to learn and ready to ask good questions and seek out good teachers and be mentored and continue to grow in the love and knowledge of God. So to be a good Christian woman at this time, we need to be formed. We need to be formed in the church. We need to be formed in truth. And there's no other way. Like, we are not going to be able to respond well if we are not putting in the hard work.
Yeah, that's so good. That's such a good point. It does require a lot of work and a lot of grit,
Yeah.
and but God has given us grace for
Mhm.
the grit. I'm convinced of it. So
Which, of course,
yeah,
there's the Holy Spirit. Like, I kinda said,
yeah,
we're not gonna be able to do that. But I think he leads us through that hard work, so
sure,
I wanna make sure
absolutely,
I'm not saying, like, we're doing it all on our own.
absolutely. Nobody thought that, but
Okay,
absolutely. Thank you
okay.
for the clarification. Viewers, by the way, if you don't have a specific question so far for Sarah for tonight's topic, why don't you, if you still are interested in the book, instead of offering a question, you could put in the chat what it is that would be the most desirable apologetics topic that you would like to learn about. So if you have one of those, an episode that we haven't run yet, if there's something that's a question that's been on your mind and you don't really know where to go for resources, if there's some sort of apologetics topic that you would like to learn more about, if you put that in the chat, then you'll be eligible for the book giveaway this evening. And so while we're waiting for those to come in, Sarah, I'm curious if you would share with the audience your conference topic that you're going to be speaking on this fall at our conference.
Oh, yes.
And just tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, I'm so honored and excited to be part of the conference and to meet a lot of you there. The topic that I have is ancient hope for a modern moment. And I'm really excited. I'm having the best time reading all kinds of books and thinking through this, praying through it, and just really being encouraged that our hope is sure. And so we're going to talk about that. Why is our hope sure? What is our hope? And how does that affect how we live in this moment? So that's kind of how far I've gotten with that.
Yeah, I think that's great because I think all of us are looking for clarity and courage. In fact, I think the two go together. I think the more clarity you get on a particular issue, the more courageous you are in standing up and speaking and working for it.
And the more
Yeah, so
able you are to be calm about it, you know?
yeah, true.
What happens is Christians get defensive or quiet. I always say we get silent or violent when we don't have the confidence to engage in the
Yeah,
conversation. That doesn't mean we have to know the answer, but we can stay engaged with good
yeah,
questions. We can say, "Hey, let's talk more about this another time. Let me go do some research," that kind of
yeah.
thing. But
And with sincere interest in the person and not just winning the argument, when you really kind of understand the nuts and bolts, or at least at a
Mhm.
deeper level, what's going on a particular issue, you can
Yeah.
engage. You don't have to stick to a script. You're comfortable enough with it that you can kind of engage in conversation. I think that helps
Mhm.
everyone.
Yeah.
Okay, one thing I want us to make sure we mention tonight is that I think it's possible that a lot of women believe that their only legitimate area of ministry is their family, that they don't
Mm.
have any areas of ministry outside their kiddos. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, one thing is that my first thought is just that family is not just for its own sake, it's for the blessing of the world around us. And so, with that in mind, we can ask those questions of our family. And of course, there are different seasons. Some seasons are so much more demanding, like when your kids are itty bitty, your time is more limited because you are in higher demand from your family and from your kids and just keeping them alive. And so there are different seasons, but I think there's always the opportunity to do small things and remember that it starts small. And then to invite your kids in with you if you can, or to like think about yourself as a mentor. You're just a little bit further along than your kids. You're able to invite them into this feast that's set before us as Christians in learning and growing in the knowledge and love of God. And so how are you doing that? And can you model that for them in a way that's like share what you're learning, share what God is placing on your heart, involve them in things that you're involved in. My kids feel like they own the church because and maybe sometimes that's not the best, but I just bring them. If I'm doing stuff at church, they're just with me. And so they know their way around. My daughters know how to run the dishwasher. They know how to, do all those things. And Hunter is 6 and he knows all the old people at church. And so that's another thing is start by just helping them pay attention. And that's small. It seems small, but it's huge. So for example, in our family, in our church, we have a lot of old people, and I love old people, and we don't value the elderly in our society right now, and I just think, gosh, what a shame. We're missing so much goodness. And
Mhm.
so when the kids were little, I would bribe them at first and say, before you go get your cookie, go say hi to 3 old people. And I didn't say 3 old people. I said, go say hi to 3 people sitting in the front rows, And so now of course, they're friends and they don't have to be reminded. And even Hunter goes to Miss Lucia every week. He gets her bulletin, he tips his hat to her and he says hello, and it's pretty sweet. But I also think it's important to tell them how to talk to older people, because that can be intimidating. Just where do you even start? So I always tell them the kind of basic rules of etiquette are: answer in a complete sentence, ask a follow-up question. Well, actually, first is look them in the eye.
Yeah.
Answer in a complete sentence. So, yes, I'm doing great today. Ask a follow-up question. How are you doing? Something like that. And then stay to listen to the answer. Because that when they're little and squirrely, they like to run off. But I would say kind of take inventory of what you are involved in. If you feel too spread thin to get involved in anything in the church, then is there something else that can give? And the things that you are giving the most time to, Carl Truman says, the communities that we give our most of our loyalty to are the ones that are shaping us the most. So what communities do you want shaping you and your family the most? And maybe start with that question. Not that we only invest in the church, but it is a place that we should invest. So
Yeah.
those are
Yeah.
kind of
I
my
agree.
thoughts. Yeah.
The 2 people in my life that I would consider closest to me had really, really strong uh, examples of giving and serving. And so as a result, they do that quite naturally. And so it's been really interesting
Mm,
for me to look at their lives and see where that came from. It's so helpful as a mom to see that effect,
that's so
because it's
cool.
such an encouragement to say, I've got to be diligent with my kids and bring, like you say, bringing them along and teaching them how to do this stuff so that it becomes a natural expectation
Mhm.
of their lives. Okay, I have one last question for
Okay.
you, and then we will skip to the giveaway. So, one of our viewers wants to know how it is that we could pray for you.
Oh, thank you. Well, I'm in this moment with you guys. So, as a mother, I've got 3 girls. I've got an 18-year-old, a 16-year-old, and a 14-year-old. My 18-year-old is at college, her first year. And then I have a little surprise tech, Hunter. He's a boy and he's 6. So, my parents are wonderful. My dad has health issues, and so that's always part of my week is figuring out creative ways to be there for them. So yeah, pray for me as a mom. I feel like, when I was a young mom, I thought I would get to this season of being a mom and kind of have it together and know what I was doing. But I know I can almost hear you guys laughing at me because that just doesn't happen. You rely even more on the Lord in those seasons, and you have to remind yourself of the truth that he loves your children more than you do. And so I need to be reminded of that all the time.
Excellent. We would be honored to be able to pray that for you, because we totally get it. We're all there
Yes.
too, so we get that absolutely. Okay, so just a reminder that our book giveaway this evening is "Live Not by Lies" by Raj Rare. Such a good book, such a compelling book. You're going to love it. And the winner for tonight is Katie Robinson. So, Katie, if you will hop into the chat and just say hello to our moderators, they will find you and get your information and instructions so we can get the book to you and get all that handled. But congratulations, Katie. This is really, it's really such an interesting, engaging, deep read. So I think you're really going to be blessed by that. And I'm glad you get to take that home at some point. All right. So for, it was mentioned earlier, but if you were listening to Sarah tonight and you thought, wow, I would love to go to a conference where Sarah is speaking. So now is your chance. You can check out our conference webpage at womeninapologetics.com/2024 WIA Conf, CONF, to learn more or even to register. And if you'd like to learn more about Sarah, you can find her podcast website at colsoncenter.org. strong-women. So it's the Strong Women podcast through the Colson Center. And you can find her there. Next month, we are going to be changing our format just a little bit for Voices of WIA. We're going to be meeting with you guys during the lunch hour. So we're switching from evening to daytime for only about a half an hour. So it's going to be a little shorter and a little earlier, but we think that'll be a really good change for you guys. So don't miss our discussion next month, May 16th, with Jade Turner, because we're going to be talking about how a good apologist also needs to be a good theologian. So that'll be a really good conversation. Jade is WIA's co-founder and is a curriculum director with us. So that's going to be a really interesting conversation, really good conversation. You won't want to miss that. And I'll be following our new format. So in the meantime, between now and then, please feel free to follow us on our social medias and subscribe to our YouTube channels. As usual, you can learn more about Women in Apologetics just by going to our website at womeninapologetics.com and by following us on Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube at Women in Apologetics. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel so that you never miss one of these Voices of WIA episodes or any of our other video resources that are also there for you. So goodbye for tonight. It was such a great conversation. I'm so glad that you were here. Thank you, Sarah Stonestreet, for being such a wonderful, insightful guest. And we will see you next time for a lunch break interview with Jade. Thank you from the entire WIA team. Good night and God's blessings to you. See you next time.